Welcome to Lou Palumbo's Between the Lines. Problem solving for our future. Lou. Common sense, logic, and reasoning. Lou. The man that can't stand hate and animus. Lou. Stimulating the thought process of America. Lou. Where being right is not political, it's factual. Lou. Providing real solutions in real time. And now, here's your host, Lou Palumbo.
So welcome to Between the Lines. My name is Lou Palumbo. We're going to have a very interesting show today. We have a young gentleman, Christian Briggs, and we're also going to have Tom Fuentes, a former assistant director of the FBI. Christian is going to speak as to this transitioning into digital currency, and we may ask Tom for his input regarding what he has found as to the feasibility of this happening. A lot of it's going to be some opinions, so you can take from it what you choose, but I think you're going to find this very interesting and very enlightening. You might even find it alarming. In the interim, I want to go back to this whole issue of the media, which really sticks in my craw because this lack of responsibility regarding the manner in which they disseminate information is just startling. I know we're all pigeonholed and handicapped and hogtied by the First Amendment. At some point, we're going to have to look to the First Amendment to figure out some form of resolution as to how they're allowed to just indiscriminately make stuff up if they want without consequence. But I do want to say something else. Last week, Tom and I had a little exchange, I believe it was, and I kind of lightheartedly mentioned to Tom that Whoopi Goldberg became an authority on how information is classified. She believes that the vice president can declassify. Tom Fuentes clearly cleared that up. This is a gentleman that managed SCIFs, managed 80 field officers of the FBI's international operation. It's been intimately involved at times in even classifying information. Believe me, ladies and gentlemen, I don't think there's anybody more knowledgeable in this area than Tom. So, of course, Tom negated Whoopi's claim. The response to this was rather unusual. You know, we had a lot of people back and forth expressing concerns or belief or disbelief as to what Whoopi said as being legitimate or not. But here's the bottom line. This isn't her first time at the rodeo. I would like to explain something that transpired in 1977. Roman Polanski, prominent film director. Unfortunately, his wife, Sharon Tate, was murdered in the Tate LaBianca murders in the summer of '69 in Los Angeles. With that being said, we're going to move ahead now back to 1977. He was accused and pled guilty to raping a 13-year-old little girl. He was additionally charged with sodomy, intercourse with a minor, plying the minor with substances, controlled substances, rape by use of drugs, perversion. And let me tell you about sodomy, by the way. Sodomy lends itself to anal penetration and oral copulation, or some of you might know it as a blowjob. This is a 13-year-old little girl. So here's what happens. Amidst the negotiation with all the attorneys, they cut some form of a sweetheart deal where he's going to go to jail for about 60 days in Chino State Prison. 42 days, they let him out. And all of a sudden, the light goes on with the judges, apparently, that you really can't do this with this case. So he gets wind of the fact they're going to renege on the deal, and off he goes to Europe. Now we're going to move ahead to September 26th of 2009. He's arrested in Zurich, Switzerland, by the Swiss police. And of course, the United States wants to extradite him back to the United States to properly sentence him. And of course, there was a big brouhaha. And someone decided that the 60 days that he was allegedly going to serve for this crime was sufficient. Not even the biggest problem attached to this. So at the time, this was like a hot button in the entertainment industry because, you know, like the Republicans and the Democrats and everybody, the cops, you know, the entertainment people, when our guys sin, they can do no wrong. Long story short, Whoopi Goldberg gets involved in a conversation regarding this during The View, at which point she voluntarily gave this statement. Well, it wasn't a rape. So I wanted to ask Whoopi, although it was kind of hard to get a hold of her and I really wasn't going to pursue her too adamantly, could you please qualify for me what a rape is? This was a 13-year-old little girl. Now, what I really like are all the people in The View. I hate to say this, and I say this as kindly as I can. You seem like you've got some level of anger, which leads to nothing good. I know and have met Joy Behar. I like her personally. Some things that they say on that show, including Joy, are a little alarming. Their perspectives, their understanding, which is a very narrow train of thought, in the big picture of the country and the planet, is what it is. I don't know how we're still on air, to be candid with you, except there's a lot of controversy embroiled in this show. But this was Whoopi's position on the Roman Polanski case with a 13-year-old girl. It wasn't a rape. So where were the people from now? Where were the Me Too movement, Time's Up, all these people? Where's the outrage? You can't talk out of two sides of your mouth. Talk about the disparity in which women are subjected to, the pandering that you're subjected to, all of which I agree with, which I am adamant about pursuing. And then come out with a statement like it wasn't a rape because it was one of your own? Explain to me, Whoopi, what constitutes rape? Do you even understand the penal law? Do you know what what constitutes rape, statutory rape? This was a 13-year-old little girl. I don't know what to say to you. But this lends itself to a bigger problem with the media. And now I realize there's a little gray area regarding The View. Is this really the media, these journalists? No, but they're out here disseminating information that people latch on to as being accurate and truthful. Kind of like the comment about, I don't understand the big problem here. The vice president can declassify information. The president can declassify. This ill-informs the public, and it further divides us. Let's be accurate and responsible in what we have to say. Now, I do have to bring up something else, interestingly enough. So in the midst of examining through some form of litigation, they got their hands on some text messages between some of the journalists or whomever they call themselves on Fox, which were not very flattering in the direction of the then President Donald Trump and even post-Donald Trump in questioning the legitimacy of the election cycle. And needless to say, they've now made an issue of it. Sean Hannity, any number of them, Ashley Ainsley, a lot of them saying that they thought he was crazy and, they didn't buy into it. But meanwhile, they went on air, they were claiming and saying, no, we should investigate this. There's going to be an investigation. I got it. Where were you guys when you were reading the text messages from Peter Strzok and Lisa Page about undermining our election process of the President of the United States? I agree with you. That's pretty egregious. You shouldn't be thinking one thing and saying something else to promote a platform. All, by the way, so we're clear about something, was tied to the financial viability of their network, which translates to viewership, sponsors, and their paychecks. This is how convoluted this has become. And you guys do understand. Tom and I, who you'll hear from later today, are very like-minded, as is Lloyd Molander and everyone else who's involved with this podcast and this production. We're not Democrats or Republicans. We're Americans first, and we're parents first. We have a responsibility to our children. What we're leaving our kids is going to be horrific. The one thing the media has done masterfully is divide this nation, and they do it without oversight. I have to tell you, there's a lot of topics to talk about. Yesterday, they came out and released the fact that Biden has now committed another $500 million to the Ukraine. We have people that one as recent as yesterday I spoke to. I think they've gotten about $1,000 a person, which I'm struggling to understand what that's supposed to do for you. $500 million to the Ukraine. When are you going to look in the direction of this Palestine, Ohio? I mean, help me out here, folks. This is absolutely ludicrous. And they had the mayor and some residents of Palestine. It's Palestine, I think, is the way they like to pronounce it, because Palestine is that country that we're having a little rub with Israel. But you guys understand what I'm talking about. No one has shown up until 2 weeks later, and that was FEMA. Where's the rail company? I heard they're talking a big game. They say never let your mouth write a check. Your body isn't going to cash. They're promising to make these people whole. I hope they understand what that means, because it sounds like they're going to have to relocate them. The gentleman I spoke to yesterday, who's we're going to try to have on the show next week, was 8 houses from this ground zero, basically where this incident took place. I don't know how he's going to go back and live in that house. Now he rents the place, he volunteers. Where's the government, by the way? Just asking a question now. Providing them housing that they're not going to pay for. Kind of like the 40,000 migrants in the city of New York, just to start with. That's being done at the expense of the taxpayer. We pay taxes to help people in circumstances like the people in Palestine are going through right now. We're feeding, clothing, housing, medicine, and education probably for 5 million plus immigrants that have crossed our border illegally since the beginning of this president's term. Or as Chuck Schumer would allude to, 11 million plus illegal immigrants in this country that he wants to give amnesty to so they can vote. We're footing the bill on this, guys. Now, with that being said, wouldn't it be prudent to look in the direction of this little community? By the way, Adams, the mayor in the city of the city of New York, is asking the federal government for $1 billion of reimbursement, taxpayers' money, to pay for people illegal in that city. 40,000 migrants they talk about, which is, by the way, my home. Now, I often say the cuckoo has left the clock. Not only has he left the clock, but he's flown outside the borders of the U.S. By the way, folks, something I spoke to a long time ago, the northern border. All of a sudden, we've had divine enlightenment, and we're realizing that I think the surge is up 186% coming across our northern border into the United States. I don't know who's running the government today, and I'm not here to criticize or ridicule or demean anybody. Guys, whatever mistakes we're making, let's just learn from them and go forward. We don't have time to bash each other's heads in rhetorically, which is commonly done in the media for the purpose of generating an audience. You know, the media seems to think, not to go back to them for a second, but the media seems to think their responsibility is to entertain us. No, it's not. You're there to inform us, to give us things to think about, food for thought, which is what we're trying to do. I'm not here telling you you have to believe everything I say. I'm asking you go out and become your own investigator. There's an immense amount of information available to you on the internet that's accurate. Don't be spoon-fed by me. Stop being spoon-fed by this 24-hour news cycle that, by the way, people are questioning its credibility more and more, just like the government, just like other institutions in this society. Maybe one of the most egregious things to happen is this issue with our FBI, which Tom has spoken to quite intelligently. You know, these guys were the go-to guys. When all else failed, we knew we went to the FBI, they had your back. They keep it in alignment. There was honor, integrity, and trustworthiness. Compromised by Comey, McCabe, Strzok, Lisa Page, and Thibault, I think his name was the guy who had just recently had to resign last year because of the way he managed the Hunter Biden laptop, which, by the way, has suddenly left the conversation. Hunter Biden laptop, very simple. Let the American public see what's on it. Cut out all of the nasty behavior he has with these hookers or whomever he chooses to fraternize with, which is, by the way, that's his business. I don't care about that. Let's have some transparency and some truth here. Let's take the political agenda away from this issue and let us see, have we been compromised in the Ukraine, China, and Russia? You might be disturbed to find out maybe we have, but we're at least entitled to know. And you know what else? You're all entitled to something better than this, especially our children and our young people. We're going to go to a quick break. Didn't mean to blow off this much steam, but you guys need to understand there's a problem here in the country today. We are destabilizing this country on a daily basis. You know, for those of you that are familiar with this January 6th epic where they went after the president of the United States, a former president, which I think we're still doing 2 years after he's out of office. Guys, try to connect the dots on this one yourself, okay? They have people who are incarcerated, haven't been formally charged. I think Tom Fuentes, if we have time, we'll speak to that again through Tom because he's intimately involved. Okay, guys, we're going to, there's something else that came up, and I'm going to probably ask the producer on the show, Lloyd Molander, to speak to this topic. But apparently in Culver City, the school district decided to eliminate AP classes, advanced classes, because there weren't enough minorities that were able to participate in them. We're going to delve into that a little bit further if we have time. We are going to bring this gentleman on, Christian Briggs, and then we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back to you. Just stand by, guys. Instacart, another interesting concept. You can go to your favorite grocery stores, sign on to their application without leaving your home, the comfort of your home. Just pick out the items you'd like. They'll assign a personal shopper for you and deliver them to the point that you would like them delivered to. Another great concept, very user-friendly, and I'll be honest, we use it also. It's very effective, and they're very, very good. They're very on point. We're back, ladies and gentlemen, and as I mentioned, I'm going to bring the producer on the show, producer of the show, Lloyd Molander, on, and he's going to give you a little more background as to what's going on in Culver City and its school district. Lloyd, if you would.
Sure. You know, Lou, this show is about solutions and helping the next generation out. You have kids that are this age and probably are well aware of what AP classes are. They're the classes that help you get into a good college. They're classes that help you prepare for college. And it seems like another school district in California, the Culver City School District, has decided that they're going to eliminate AP classes and lower the ceiling rather than raising the floor. And there's a really good quote here they have is Culver City cuts precipitated when a group of English teachers at the school presented data to the school board that showed Black and Hispanic students were underrepresented in honors classes. Well, of course, parents came back, and there's some really good quotes from parents about how ridiculous that is. You got to use your common sense, logic, and reasoning for that. You raise the floor, you don't lower the ceiling, and you find ways to include but do not exclude those bright students from getting in great schools by taking AP classes. Lou, you have some experience with this with your kids, I'm sure. Why don't you give us a little color on that?
Well, my children, all my children are in AP classes of some way, shape, or form, English or history or whatever it may be. But what's really interesting about this conversation, if you listen to Lloyd, is that this is another feeble attempt or a form of pandering. If, in fact, you really want to change the trajectory of this minority community, ladies and gentlemen, you're going to have to spend some money and dedicate some bodies into the minority community. As I always say to you, let's give these children a chance to learn. Instead of going into environments in Brooklyn and Queens and the Bronx, and these are areas I'm familiar with, and Chicago and Philadelphia, where they just go into classroom settings and all they do, I guess, is mark off time, because teaching is kind of problematic there. There's a lot of disruption. Why don't we give them a legitimate chance to learn in the community so they have a better chance for advancement? And while you're at it, why don't we also address issues in these minority communities where these children at times are collateral damage to the gang activity or the criminal activity? And while you're at it, why don't we address their diet and their medicine and their housing, of which I am intimately knowledgeable because I came out of Brooklyn and Bed-Stuy. I remind everyone, I was the only white kid on the block. This is not something new to me. And what Lloyd is pointing out is something that is doing a disservice to the minority community, because we're really not inclined to help them get to a level of learning that they're entitled to have. But you're going to have to spend money, ladies and gentlemen. And the way that we're running our major cities, we're probably going to have to put the National Guard in with the police department to get the guns off the streets, so kids don't have to worry about sitting in the front rooms of their homes, living rooms, and worry about getting hit in the head with a bullet, which has factually happened, or navigate the streets where they're incidentally shot. So I guess this thing in Culver City is some form of reparation. I don't know what this is about. This is just not what we should be doing. And you know what? This problem didn't rear its head overnight. It's not going to be fixed overnight. It's going to take time, but we haven't even stepped in that direction. Most egregiously, the Democrats, who continue to mislead the minority communities that they care about them. They don't. If you did, you'd be doing what I said. And if you'd like, come meet me. I'll write it out for you and explain to you how you can do it. Shame on the Republicans, because they don't even entertain the notion of going in and establishing relationships with the clergy and the local elected officials to incorporate some of these things I just spoke to. These children have to have an opportunity to learn. So when they get into Culver City, we don't have to have a discussion about who's qualified or eligible to get into AP classes. Guys, you understand the scope of the problem? This is symptomatic of a bigger problem, this thing in Culver City. So, Lloyd, I do want to thank you for bringing that up. It's clearly relevant, and it's another example of how we pander in this country. We pander to minorities. We pander to our children. We pander to women. I don't know what to say, guys. This is absolutely ridiculous. And just to remind everyone, like these sexual assault cases, and I don't want to go back to Roman Polanski, it's not necessary. It's an illness. It's not a crime of fruition. I'll explain to you the difference. At the end of the show, Tom, myself, and Lloyd decide we're going to go rob a JP Morgan Chase bank because we heard there's $5 billion in the place. That's a crime of fruition. Sexual assault is not a crime of fruition. It's an illness. So if you follow my train of thought, you need to be incarcerated for the rest of your life, taken out of the mainstream of the population. Unfortunately, because even if we medicate you, if you go off your meds, you revert right back to this mode of behavior. I want to point out something else. Rape is one of the most underreported, if not the most underreported crime we have. has also one of the highest rates of recidivism. I'll tell you about a case I have without giving you the players. Young man, first day he met a woman in Pennsylvania, raped her, went to jail for 10 years. They let him out. Mandatory counseling is required. Through the course of this mandatory counseling, he volunteers the fact that he was fantasizing about raping one of my clients, who's fairly well known. So, of course, they had demonstrated some good sense. They contacted me, other powers to be. I'm not going to tell you who because you might connect the dots. So we started a dialogue with him. And I said, guys, can I ask you a question? Why don't you violate him and put him back in? Nah, we can't because he did this voluntarily. Oh, really? So how do you plan on monitoring this individual? We're going to put a bracelet on him. Let me inform you of this. We've had women sexually assaulted by men wearing bracelets on their ankles. And by the way, are you going to dedicate someone to track this guy every time he moves? And by the way, is he restricted as to any place is there a radius that he can't travel outside of? No. So what's the purpose of the bracelet? This is how I would say backwards thinking we are in this culture. We need to re-legislate the sentencing guidelines on sex offenders. Period. End of discussion. You don't get 3 years or 5 years. You go to jail for the rest of your life. Period. And that's just the beginning of the addressment. I'm not a big proponent of the death penalty. And guys, that probably shocks you because I sound like I would be, but I'm not. Because of the human frailty attached to putting people to death. I know we've incarcerated people incorrectly 15, 20 years. I guarantee you we've executed people mistakenly. Now today with DNA, it's a lot easier for us to connect the dots as to who is participating in crimes and who isn't. Participating in crimes, and who isn't. But still, I'm not really there. But I got to tell you this. If we catch you sexually assaulting a woman, kind of like in that video where the guy went into a gym in Florida, which was played, you can execute that guy for me. We're going to take a quick break, guys. We're going to be right back. We're going to bring in Christian Briggs. He's the owner of Hard Asset Management. He's their CEO. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back. Stay with us, guys. So let me tell you a little bit about Buzzsprout. Very interesting concept. Basically, it allows you to set up your own podcast. One of the most advantageous things about using Buzzsprout is it's user-friendly. So I encourage you highly, if your inclination is to create your own podcast, please look into Buzzsprout. And by the way, we use it. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we have with us today Christian Briggs. He is the CEO of Hard Asset Management since 1987. Hold on to your seats because you're going to hear some interesting thing about transitioning to digital currency. The first thing I want to say to you is so we're accurate. It looks like the Golden Gate Bridge behind Christian. He's not in San Francisco. We know where he is. Anyway, we're going to start out by just asking Christian some questions regarding rare coins and precious metals, things of that nature, and this transition to digital currency. In addition, Tom Fuentes, who's a former assistant director of the FBI, whose resume speaks for itself, he and I are both investigators by trade, so we're doing some probing. Tom has some insight as to feasibility of this happening, and I think you guys are going to hear an interesting show right now. So, Christian, I want to thank you for joining us today, and I just want to start off by asking you, can you explain what this transition to digital currency represents to the average person?
Sure, and thanks for having me. So, kind of give you a background. When I had a software company, we created digital point of sale systems within video as well as static imagery, to where you could watch the video, click on the moving image or whatever it might have been within the video, and you would instantly have a transaction. So fast forward 10 years later, we're going from a cash society to a cashless society, where the evolution of digital payments now is going to be your phone, which is the wallet. And what the Federal Reserve and the central banks around the world are doing is putting together a platform that'll interconnect itself throughout the world, and they will have different types of central bank digital currencies. So it'll be a digital dollar, digital peso, digital pound, digital euro, and they'll all intersect on a platform that will allow the transactions to take place in milliseconds. Cash will become obsolete. And then the new payment form, which is much like Venmo. Venmo's been around now for a number of years through PayPal. It's a program that allows for digital peer-to-peer payment systems to transact from A to B. So no different than a centralized system, but Venmo is centralized. People need to realize that decentralized is more like your Bitcoin, your Ethereum, and other forms of cryptocurrency that we've become used to. And in that sense, when you centralize it, the digital payments will be centralized through central banks, and you'll have instantaneous transactional capabilities.
So I just want to just say one thing so the audience is clear. All of those denominations you carry, singles, fives, tens, 20s, 50s, hundreds, they will basically be valueless. Is that correct, Christian?
Correct. You'll have instant tokens. So you'll all have just dollars. So if something is $30,000, you'll have 30,000 tokens in your wallet. Some of the things that are going to associate your ability to own that wallet and to have the tokens and the digital dollars, we'll call them tokens because tokens are the digital form of payments online or in your wallet through your phone. Let's call it that. So what will happen is you'll also have a social credit score that'll be tied in to your everyday life. And then that will determine, in many cases, how many tokens you've got, how many you can use, when you can use them, where you can use them. And then that will then also be centralized, and that will give the government full control over all of your options of payment. So some of those options, like in the UK, take, for example, the current prime minister. About a year and a half ago, when he was on the Joe Rogan show as a checker of the chancellor, which was the secretary of the treasury of the UK, he said there'll be some limitations on the ability to use your digital currency in places of business or for services that the government may render to be not fit for you to purchase or to use those services. So
put a cap on that. Give us an example of what that means, Christian. So you walk into a facility and you go to use your digital currency hooked to your phone, and what happens?
So, for example, if you're buying a truck that has diesel engine, your carbon footprint may be such that the government determines you'll have to pay an additional carbon tax every time you drive that vehicle, whether it's based on miles or based on the amount of pollutions that will come out. There'll be other things, according to what we're starting to hear, and that is limitations on products and services, guns, ammo, anything the government deems to be hostile, or it could be leading to hate speech, which is censorship in its purest form. So you have this communistic style way of which the people will get their earned income through the Federal Reserve. Their employer will literally send over requests. The Federal Reserve, in our situation, that's our central bank, will then deposit the tokens based on what the individual has earned for the month, the week, however they want to break it down. But the government will put limits and limitations on products and services it deems to be not within the scope of proper products and services to even own or use. So they're going to be like censorship. Well, there's also going to be product and services censorship.
Let me ask you this, Christian. So is it possible that the government will be able to arbitrarily tap into your phone, access your digital currency, and take what they want or what they think they're entitled to at any given time? Is that what we're talking about as well?
Yes, they currently are doing that in China, and they've been doing it now for a number of years. In fact, just 4 days ago, Japan launched its CBDC, and it also has a social credit score tied into it. And they'll also have limitations for each citizen within Japan, or the people of Japan who are using this wallet, which is now becoming mandated. And it'll start to be able to, it's almost like you're euthanizing the ability of free thinking to buy products and services. You're killing that ability to program people to only buy things of which the government deems to be proper products or services. Not only can they reach in your wallet and tax you additional monies based on your social credit score, but they can also make you spend all your money per month to maintain the growth in the economy. And if you don't spend it, the old saying is, use it or lose it. So now you're going to have to spend the money in order to maintain the government's right of use on your own money. And two, some of those products and services that you would take very randomly now may not be available in the next year or two. But make no mistake, November 15th of last year, multiple banks in the U.S., it's all over the news wires, you certainly can look it up, so over 23 banks, approximately, give or take, are now in this program for the pilot of the CBDC launch.
Christian, name a few of the banks.
Oh, you got it. Wells Fargo, Bank of America, Truist, TD Ameritrade, and the list goes on. And come around probably another 6 to 8 weeks, that trial period of that pilot program should be completed. And that program is based on the ability for commercial banking, bank to bank, then the consumer retail programming should launch sometime around October this year, from what I'm hearing. Could be as late as December, but the idea is to launch it in October so consumers can get used to it for holiday shoppings this year.
So I want to ask you this other very, very pertinent question. We're going to have to, I guess, negotiate what a dollar might be worth versus a digital currency amount in your phone. How is that going to work? In other words, will a $20 bill be worth $20 equally in digital currency, Christian? How is that going to work? The conversion.
Well, if you're asking me how it's going to convert from paper to digital, what the ratio might be, I'm gonna give back a little bit of background information that I did in our due diligence and our investigation about what could be. First, we found a May 21 article in Forbes magazine where Stephen Forbes talked about the upcoming CBDC and what it means for the consumer. The consumer is everybody who buys and sells anything, whether you're a business owner, an employee, whether you have a large or small scale business. It doesn't really matter. It's all going to affect us in the same way. But Steve made a very good comment. It's a good article. I recommend everyone look it up. It's not hard to find. He said, in his opinion, it's very doubtful that the ratio of 1-for-1 is highly improbable, that more like a 1.5 would be more realistic, because if the government's going to issue a whole new currency, to devalue the currency makes goods business for the government because it devalues the debt. Okay, it devalues their debt by X amount of approximate percentages to the same ratio that they convert the greenbacks to the new digital currency. Now, we've seen documents that allude, nothing's in stone until you know the check's in the bank and it clears, but we've seen documents that are available on the Federal Reserve's website which show a little bit more sinister type ratio, possibly up to 4-to-1. Now, again, all of this is conjecture until the final day that it happens. But the fact that they're actually showing this, or they're actually playing with formalizations that would reverse the value, but then, and their argument is, well, we didn't reverse the value for just you, is for everybody. So everybody becomes more equally, call it equally worth, right? So the Great Reset that the World Economic Forum talks about, which a lot of these big leaders, the central banks and government politicians are a part of, the Great Reset is not secular religion. It's not resetting the tables of which we all eat by, but rather our wealth gap. And so if they do the reverse ratio, which is highly probable something's going to get done, it actually equalizes the wealth gap from the wealth gives to the have-nots. So there's definitely going to be some mechanism to devalue the paper and to reduce the debt, not through paying it down, but by devaluing the currency. As Lenin once said,
interesting,
the best way to destroy economy is taxation, inflation, destroy the currency.
I want to go to Tom Fuentes for a second, because Tom is, I would say he's like a premier investigator. He spent almost 30 years in the FBI, was one of the assistant directors. Resume speaks for itself. Tom has been delving into this a little bit himself, and we had some conversations regarding what he found. Tom, you're finding some legitimacy based on your investigation as to what Christian is saying. Am I correct, sir?
No, that's correct. I think Christian's exactly right. What I'm not finding, and maybe Christian has better answers than me and probably does, is how exactly are they going to implement this? What exactly are they going to do? When you talk about the social credit score, you know, the way that's implemented in China is that you cannot buy a railroad ticket. You can't buy a bus ticket. You can't buy a plane ticket. You can't go grocery shopping if you don't have a high enough social credit score. You can't even leave your apartment because there's nowhere to get other than walking to another place. You can't get there. So if we ended up with that kind of a social credit score here, then that governs every aspect of your life. It's absolute tyranny. There's no question about it. So they're going to, you know, if they're going to implement digital currency and determine what it's okay for you to buy or spend money on or invest in, then you're at the mercy of the government. The government will tell you what you can do and when you can do it.
And I think, Christian, if I'm correct, that's a major concern of yours as well. I have another question that we spoke about in a different forum. You know, how do we see the public reacting to this, that one day they wake up, and we're not talking about people that are tracking this, like kind of like we're speaking to it, but they walk into a grocery store one day to find out that the denominations that they've been using for, centuries suddenly don't buy anything. And they haven't really been, I would say, up to speed with how to go through this conversion. I mean, what's the reaction of the public? Now, Tom, I know you had some insight or some opinions about how we went gently into the night with the vaccines, and we now know that we were gravely misled. I'm wondering if the public is going to sit by and just kind of go with the flow on this thing. Is there really, Christian, a feasibility for this to take place with 360 million people in this country?
There's an easy feasibility. If you can lock down 360 million people over the flu by scaring them well enough, you can pretty much scare them into anything. That's the interesting part about what the digital currency is going to offer, and they're going to sell it like this: efficiency and safety. So your money is safe. It's efficiently used as a payment systems from peer to peer. So on the surface, it sounds fabulous. I got a document that was dated January of 21. That document came from MasterCard. It was an internal document shared within in the context of the management and the employees of MasterCard. And it was very clear. And I can share that with you all at some point. If you want me to email it to you, it's not a problem. That document made it sound like the CBDC was the greatest event since our Constitution was laid down in front of us in 1776. It made it sound CBDC is going to be the best thing, the fastest way for prosperity and utopia in the United States. And when you read it, it makes it all sound real good, okay? I was in a Bible study with Zig Ziglar for years in Dallas, and he once said, you can have a brownie with a little bit of poop, or you can have it with a lot of poop. It still tastes like crap. So when you look at this document, it's crap. It sounds nice, looks nice, but doesn't taste nice. And I will tell you this: once you have the control of people's money, you have control of their very livelihood. If you have control of their livelihood, that's their life. So as this thing is implemented and comes out sometime this fall, as expected, and yes, people are going to push back hard, but when they make the greenback completely obsolete and unusable within society, commerce, like did the UK on September 30th last year, Lou, you know this, Tom knows this, we talked about this. They literally took the paper currency, made it worthless. Had you not turned it in, and to turn it in, you had to have 2 government IDs, bank account. You had to show why you had it cash. Where did you get the cash? How'd you earn the cash? There were so many stipulations, and the new currency is a polymer, basically plastic, that can be easily located with mechanisms inside that can then determine high density forms of that currency in a location. So that could be money laundering. That could be mafia stuff. That could be any number of things that the government deems to be suspicious, and they come and get it or they turn it off. This is exactly what's going to happen with the central bank digital currency on a global basis. So you're going to see a lot of pushback, a lot of scared people, but ultimately within days of this thing going public and becoming part of our mainstream payment systems, what are you going to do? That's all you got. You can't go too long without food.
These are good points. We're going to continue this conversation after this short break. I'm going to come back to Christian Briggs, the CEO of Hard Management Assets. Just stick with us, guys. I think you're going to find this very, very, very interesting as to the direction this country is going to go in regards to digital currency. We'll be right back, guys. We're back, ladies and gentlemen. We have with us today Christian Briggs, the CEO of Hard Asset Management. I'm going to have to ask Christian in a second how we're going to prepare for this transition. What should we be investing in, if anything, at this point? I know he's got the answer to that. I want to make sure I understand this, Christian, that if you have stacks of cash, at some point, if you're in the heartland of America and you haven't followed the conversation, you could suddenly wake up and have all of this currency valueless. Is that correct?
Yes.
And so what will these people do when they go to the grocery store to feed their kids, other than have a meltdown?
They'll have a meltdown and try to steal the food.
Very good point. And that's a little bit about what we've had spoken to in prior discussion, which could bring us into some type of civil unrest. I know that the people on the coasts, for example, will be more in stride with a transition or a conversion of monies like this. I'm worried about the people between the coasts that don't monitor and track activities like this, much the way we are right now. I did want to ask you this other question regarding the links and other information. You'll get them to the producers of the show so we can start to disseminate some of this information for the viewer more user-friendly?
Yes. In fact, to go back to your one question about the grocery store thing, here's the alarming part of this. How many people out there actually know what a central bank digital currency is, let alone when it's going to be implemented? The fact that Venmo right now controls 17% of the digital payments that are done and transacted through mobile is alarming in itself. 17%, that's a lot of people just in the last few years. But the other part is how many people don't know about it, and when they are surprised one morning when their bank basically says what you have in the bank account now is not what you had yesterday. It's now a new form of payment, tokens. Then people realize those tokens are now engineered to be, as Tom said, built within your social credit score. So now you have no privacy. You have a government that is going to dictate policy on purchases and services, and they're going to tell you how much you can spend or don't spend in a given month, quarter, or year. Not only this is alarming, but it goes back to the very nature of the New World Order. And so going back to another question you said, as far as what do you do about it? You've got to have a hard assets. I will say this. There's an old saying in Washington, follow the money. When you see politicians who have the ability to inside trade, not the American citizen as a whole does not, and when you see their stock trades and you see what they're buying, what they're selling, they're more than likely, not every time, but basically every time I've seen, they are winners because they get information ahead of time. Now, I will say this. I've had many politicians, I've had many billionaires, and I've had people worth just a few $1 million that once they understand what's coming, they're starting to buy hard assets. Follow the money. Remember that.
Explain what a hard asset is. Christian, I hate to interrupt you, but just explain for the listener what a hard asset really is. Make specific reference.
All right. Well, in the past, we referred to hard assets as anything that's not equities or bonds. Anything those are called soft assets. Hard asset is a physical item that you can actually physically see, touch, or have an ownership in where something takes place at it. So like real estate's a hard asset. Precious metals, rare coins, art. And when you go back in the last 15 to 20 years, many of the world's richest people are not buyers of stock, they're sellers of stock, their own stock. What do they do with that money? The majority of them put that into hard assets, real estate, gold, silver, rare coins, rare art. The success record of rare art and rare coins is second to none as far as growth over the last 10, 15 years. So when an individual has cash, or has resources that they're not ready to have the government confiscate, because we're not talking about transitioning from a currency to a currency, gentlemen. We're talking about the confiscation of the current currency and watering it down and devaluing it, which we don't know right now. Could be 1.5, could be 2. Hell, it could be 5 to 1. We won't know until it actually happens. But remember this, the day it does happen, it's too late. We have home insurance, we have health insurance, we have car insurance. Why? Because we still need wealth insurance. So at the end of the day, hard assets will protect you. Gold is expected to be standardized against the digital currencies of the world. The record amount of gold the last 10 to 12 years that central banks have been buying is more than the last 55 years past. Just in December alone, we broke all-time records for gold purchases by central banks. China's leading it, and that gives you a lot of pause and reservations right there. They sold $4 trillion of U.S. treasuries. Now they have less than a few $100 billion worth out of $4 trillion. And they continue to sell between $30 and $50 billion per month. And what do? They're buying gold. Why are they buying gold? Because gold will reflect the demand by the governments to purchase it, standardize it against their digital currencies, and make it unlawful for people to own at some point. So the bullion is where we say to get into rare gold coins that are minimal amount of value over their bullion content, all the way up to extreme rarities. That's what people are buying. It's not a dynamic shift all of a sudden. They've been doing this for years. Politicians have known that when Bitcoin launched, it was a program to condition people to use something that doesn't exist as a store of value and pay for products and services. There's no value to it. It doesn't exist. It's not a hard asset.
Let me ask you a question, if I can interrupt you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because I think this is highly relevant for the audience. We have government officials that are aware of this. Am I correct, Christian?
Oh, 100%.
That's my point. And so what's their position on this transition, this whole conversion and devaluation of the actual denominations we carry in our pocket every day, and their take on this transition into digital currency? Are there any of them concerned?
The ones that are concerned are the ones who are constitutionalists, that are conservative people that abide by the Constitution and their oath of office. The progressive liberal and socialist communists are applauding this new world order where one government and one currency. So they're applauding the implementation of the product that will ultimately standardize, control, surveil, and contain each individual's ability to purchase products and services. So the answer to your question is the left love it, the right are opposed to it, because it will literally take the last freedom that we have, which is the freedom of purchasing whatever we want, and literally it will take that away, and government will now dictate policy on all our products and services.
I want to ask you another question about China and their attachment to this. And you and I have spoken independently of this program regarding the manner in which China is insinuated into our country. And I know that you have some very strong feelings and informations regarding that. Let's get into this China discussion a little bit here.
China. Well, first of all, they're not our friend. Contrary to the left's belief, they're not our friend. When they started the digital yuan back in 2014, they had already started selling U.S. treasuries to buy gold to support the digital yuan as a means of replacing the U.S. dollar as the world's reserve currency, because they knew that the crypto market was non-existent, but yet it had value in the concept of what people would use it every day, and they did. But they knew that in order for the China to compete on the world stage of currency value, they had to back it with gold. China is trying to dominate in three areas: military, economics, and currency reserve. And at the rate they're going, they will achieve this milestone in the next 3 years. The digital yuan is now widely accepted around the world in multiple different countries. And as you know, Lou, and Tom, you know this, in recent weeks, Saudi Arabia has said they will not exclusively use the dollar for petrol purchases or sales much longer, as they're expanding the use of other currencies, including the digital yuan. If that happens, and it already has started to happen, it will destroy the value of the dollar, because the petrodollar makes the dollar the world's reserve currency. Without petro being utilized, the demand for dollars will shrink by at least 50 to 70% around the world, which would devalue the dollar so much so that it would almost be worthless. That's their plan.
Now, what about the overall presence of China in this country? I understand that they're the second largest owner of farmland to begin with, and you once alluded to their presence in the country in a more subversive manner, if you recall our conversation about, I guess, taking over or trying to run the country.
Yeah. So there was a video by a friend of mine named Mr. Kyle Bass out of Dallas, who runs the Heyman hedge fund. In that conversation, he pointed out very clearly in Texas that a Chinese general, one of the most highest ranking generals, was buying some of the largest tracts of Texas land within just a few miles of one of the most strategic Air Force bases in all of Texas. He alerted that once that news came out in 21, there was more investigation, and whether the Chinese do it directly or use fronts, somewhere between first and second place is where China ranks in farmland. Right behind Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos. They've all started buying large-scale amounts of farmland. And what's interesting about the Chinese, however, is their strategic farmland is very centralized near bases, whether it be installations of the Air Force, the Army, or even things near the coast, near the Navy, they've secured themselves that just as of right now, and again, we know this to be for a fact, just under 400,000 acres. We don't know what else they own because they could have used non-nationals, but rather citizens that came here 30, 40 years ago. And those people would not be looked upon as Chinese nationals, but U.S. citizens with Chinese heritage that may be acceptable to be still part of the CCP Communist Party of China.
That's like a straw purchase, Christian, like a straw purchase. But
correct.
Let me go to Tom for 1 second here, because this is a national security issue, Tom. What's your impression, Tom, of the Chinese acquiring all these lands and investing in this country the way they have? What's your feeling about that?
Well, obviously, if China's doing that, it's not for a good purpose. It's not for the long run to help us. It's to help them in whatever way strategically they think they can by having proximity to strategic locations like that, sensitive locations. If I could go back to the social credit score, I don't think Americans really understand how this works in China. And I'll give you an example. There's a software company in Palo Alto that had an upcoming young star who was a Chinese national. And anyway, the CEO found out that she was walking a couple miles to work every day. Well, of course, Palo Alto, beautiful weather, no reason not to. So he called her in and he said, "This is ridiculous. We want to have a car pick you up and take you home, and you shouldn't have to walk." She said, "I have to walk because if I don't, the government of China will lower my social credit score because I'm not walking enough." That will register on her phone with the government how far she's walking or not walking, and she'll be punished if she doesn't walk enough. So therefore, don't give me a ride. You won't be helping me. I need to be able to walk so many miles a day.
I mean,
That's scary.
I think this lends itself to government control, but I want to ask you further, Christian, now about another manner in which China may have a presence in the country. What's your opinion on that, as far as military presence or having some type of soldier presence in the country? What are you thinking about that?
So in recent weeks, there's been talk about why we have the open borders. What is the true reason we have the open borders? The open borders are based on the idea and the premise that we become an asylum-seeking destination. Sounds good on paper. Sounds good in theory. But what's really been happening, and they know this now for a fact, is that Chinese nationals with ties directly to the CCP military have been coming across the border for years. The question is, how many years? 10 years, 20 years, 30 years? As Chinese people they settled here and they've raised children that are still sympathetic to the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party. And that is now becoming a reality. The estimation is that across the border south, approximately 800,000 Chinese nationals that have ties to the CCP military have now come across the border in recent years. How many are still existing here that were homegrown, we'll call it? Could be another 1 million to 1.5 million. So when people say that the Chinese army could never invade the United States, I think when they need to relook at that question and say, how many are already here and how many would they have, and what they base that estimate on, do they have enough because the army's already here to take over in a conventional war is now the theory. And that should scare everybody into understanding that the way of life that we've come so used to have is going to change. The reason China is getting so aggressive is because they can. If they didn't have some presence of military already established in the U.S., my question has been, why are they getting so aggressive? Because cockiness or confidence comes from understanding. Understanding comes from knowing. So if you know you've got secure people in a position of power, place, or in some cases could be politicians like Sowell. Remember the politician, the congressman who had the Chinese working for him that turned out to be a spy? That's just one example of how close they got to a person on the House Intelligence Committee. That should scare everybody, because if she can get to the politicians, how many Chinese have settled here in the last 40 or 50 years that have raised children that are still, again, sympathetic to the Chinese Communist Party, just like anybody in various terrorist organizations or terrorist groups that come here, and then either they are brainwashed or they get brainwashed. So my opinion is of right now, the reason why China is so aggressive in recent weeks, recent months, is because they're confident of knowing that they've got a foothold here in some way, shape, or form.
I want to go to Tom and ask him what he thinks the feasibility is on what Christian just commented on. You know, do you think we could have a presence of this type? The other thing I want to say to everybody is this. You know, we have a lot of Chinese American people in this country. I have friends of mine that are married to Chinese women, 2 of them, as a matter of fact, at least. And, you know, it's important that we make sure that they're not the focal point of any type of aggression because of the government of China. You know, I keep trying to tell everyone, when you travel and you visit places, you learn that oftentimes the government is not indicative of the sentiment of the people. Like the Iranian people are pushing back, except they're rather oppressive there. I think the same thing happens in China. I think the same thing happens in any number of countries, Russia, for example, as well. So we've got to keep our eye on the ball here. Not all Chinese people are spies. You know, this is where we kind of makes me nervous in this country, because I happen to know of a case in Arizona that after 9/11, someone who was, I believe, of Mexican descent was mistaken as being from Islam, a Muslim descent, and he ended up getting killed. You know, we have to make sure we manage our conversations and our thinking process as responsibly as we possibly can. But Tom, what do you think about the feasibility of China insinuating themselves into this culture the way it's been described by Christian?
They've already done it. It's in progress. Now, you look at a good example and a good study right now for people to use would be University of Pennsylvania, the Biden Center. You know, so Biden creates this center there, and the Chinese contribute something like $80 million to the university. And then the university pays Biden $1 million a year to put his name on this place. And once the Chinese had a financial foothold in the university, then they got the university president to write a letter to the FBI, basically, Department of Justice, for the FBI to cancel a very strong program investigating potential Chinese spies, students and professors engaged in espionage, that type of thing. And the U.S. government just canceled that program within the past 6 months. The FBI has canceled a program that's been going on for years to identify Chinese spies, and now they stopped it because it made China angry, and they were contributing enough money to this university to get the university to be on their side.
Interesting. And this corroborates a lot of what Christian is speaking to. It's interesting because both of you men are coming to a lot of the same conclusions, and you're both very different and diverse backgrounds, Tom, yours and Christian's, but there's a commonality in understanding the direction the country's going. You know, I don't know what to say about the conditions going on in this country today. I mentioned to you, Tom, that I happened to have watched C-SPAN about 9-10 weeks ago now with Christopher Wray. He was testifying to a couple of rather interesting facts, according to him. One was that the southern border was our threat to our national security, which is an interesting statement. And the other one, and people can Google this, don't take me on my word, I'm not here to lead you around, folks. He said that every 12 hours the FBI opened up a case regarding China's activity in this country. These are interesting conversations that need to continue. Unfortunately, we're going to wrap this up for today. We already discussed the fact that we're going to have multiple conversations about this. There'll be more episodes. Hopefully next week we can have the same individuals. Christian, if you're available, and Tom, if you're available. We need to continue this conversation. We want to educate the public. We're not here to tell you how to think. We're not here to tell you who to vote for, you know, what flavor ice cream you should like. Those are parts of your freedom. But there's something wrong here in paradise, ladies and gentlemen. And, you know, if we don't do something to get this back on track, we're going to lose the country, to say it to you as simply as we possibly can. I did want to have a further discussion with Christian regarding this conversion rate and the devaluation of the dollar and how that's going to help the economy offset its debt. We're going to have to do that next time, so you guys do know there's more to talk about here. I want to make sure you go to our site and check these links out. Very, very important. Christian, I want you to give some information as to how people can find you.
Sure. It's Hard Asset Management. The website is Bravo Mary Charlie H-A-M, BMC Ham, bmcham.com. And one thing I'm just going to mention, Lou, as we close, I have a dear friend whose fiance worked under the Department of Defense as a private contractor attorney, worked side by side with the FBI to vet anybody that wanted to work as a vendor with the United States power grid. And I'll tell a story on our next episode about how they discovered Chinese nationalists that were tied to the CCP, directly linked inside the power grid. And they were sending secrets back directly to China about how our power grid operates, how it's built. And then you can see what Biden did by allowing the power grid to start sending recently all of our pretty much our security about our power grid now is in the hands of the Chinese. And then, of course, our airline reservation systems. That wasn't a fluke. So we can talk about that on the next episode.
Sounds good, guys. Listen, I want to thank everyone for joining us today, listening. Christian, I want to thank you. Tom, I thank you. Lloyd, I thank you for your participation regarding this school district fiasco in Culver City, California. And I know, just so everyone knows, Lloyd is a native Californian, as is Brian Williams, who is the architect of this podcast. So thank you for joining us. I encourage you to contact us, betweenthelines.tv, questions, emails, and tune in next week. We're going to continue this conversation. Christian, thank you. Right. Tom, thank you.
And thank you.
See you next week.